I am Brianna, speaking first for the pro, and this is my first constructive. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Because Cadence and I believe in doing what's right, not what's easy, we must affirm. Resolve: the United States federal government should ban single-use plastics. Contention 1 is responsibility. The United States has let the adverse effects of pollution go too far, and now we only have a few more years to react, and it's time to act today. Asiona 19 tells us that the U.S. is currently accounted for 15% of the world's pollution. Plastic production is hazardous to human health and contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, marking plastics as a significant aspect of the fight against climate change. Fischetti in 21 finds that if emissions stay at current levels or continue to grow and we do not take action, global warming is likely to exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2050. TNC in 23 states that impacts will spread and worsen, affecting our homes and cities, economies, food and water supplies, as well as the species, ecosystems, and biodiversity of this planet we all call home. The AF ballot must be signed today. It is time for us to stop brushing environmental impacts off to the side, because we are currently seeing two key impacts taking place in the status quo. The first is human lives being lost. Because of air pollution, there are 1 million lives lost annually. The U.S. is responsible for 60,200 of those deaths. The second impact here is economic impacts, as Golden 23 explains that the global cost of plastic-related health effects was estimated at a staggering $100 billion per year. If we don't address this conflict today, once we hit 2030, these two negative impacts will be significantly perpetuated. The neg would have you throw the shot at solvency out the window. Remember, if you choose to negate, history will repeat itself, and we will continue to lose lives and steal money out of the wallets of the poor. Which leads to Cadence and I's second contention of innovation. Taking a leap into radical environmental policy change is scary. However, we've seen that radical, forced, and rushed change often leads to hefty societal benefits that often outlive us. Sultanov in 20 explains that throughout history, our most advanced technologies and economic leaps were forced through incredible circumstances, like in World War II, the invention of computers, penicillin, and vaccines. Those three inventions alone have saved and impacted the lives of over 3.6 billion people. Or the space race, for example, which led to medical imaging technologies that saves 9 million people's lives per year. It's safe to say that forcing innovation is critical when it comes to new and improved quality of life, and taking steps to save future lives. When you affirm today's resolve and ban single-use plastics, you force companies to find more sustainable materials, rethink designs, but most importantly, innovate. There are several areas of production that could improve quality of life if we force innovation, one of which is water packaging. Unfortunately for us, because we have found comfort and normality within the usage of plastic water bottles, we are starting to see the adverse effects on our health. Gowan 24 explains that there are 240,000 detectable pieces of microplastics in every 1 liter of water. Golden 23 furthers with this impact. It says that microplastics significantly damage cells in the human body, leading to serious health effects including cancers, lung disease, and most importantly, birth defects. Not only this, but toxic chemical additives and plastics can alter hormone activity in the human body, which disrupts reproduction, growth, and cognitive function. If we force innovation in the sector of the packaging industry, we could significantly minimize the amount of microplastics that sneak into our bodies. Companies have the potential to lead the way on more substantial plastic alternatives. Solutions are entirely possible. Zhang in 22 finds that in recent years, a handful of startups have emerged to address the single-use plastic pollution problem. Companies like Full Cycle and Genesis focus on using food waste and agricultural byproducts to make PHA raw material. Zhang proves two things here. First, innovation is possible, but second, lifestyle switches must happen to see any actual change. And you only do that through a pro ballot.
Okay, I will just be giving the negative constructive, and then if everyone's ready, we're good?
Yeah.
I'll begin my first word. Brigham and I stand firm negation of the following resolved. The United States federal government should ban single-use plastic. Contention 1, plastic alternatives are bad. It's no secret that there is a plastic issue, but banning single-use plastic does nothing besides make the US a worse place for companies and human life as a whole. But the alternative apps wants to tell us that will work and make the world a better place are actually way worse than what we currently have. Words in 22 states that the same effects appear when we compare glass bottles to plastic bottles. As glass bottles are much heavier, their carbon footprint for transport is also higher. Whoever substitutes a plastic straw with a bamboo straw should also probably be aware of the significant carbon footprint. Now, let's add Geiger in 22, stating that for certain types of reusable cotton bags to be less harmful to human health and to qualify of ecosystem and use less fossil fuels than single-use plastic bags, for instance, they must be reused between 100 and 365,000 times. The ban will do nothing for us besides make it worse. The only way to avoid this is by innovating, but Stainlass in 18 writes that government at the state and federal levels need to team up with the plastic private industry to address more systemic issues. We need to investigate or invest in redesigning plastics so that they can be readily broken down into the molecular units and refractured into new plastics of the same quality, the essence of a closed loop system. We need better recycling technology that can address the major obstacle of recycling plastics. About 25% of plastics collected are contaminated and therefore unusable. To actually do something, the answer is clear. Do not ban single-use plastics. But now to show more harms, let's look to our second contention of small businesses. Small businesses are what a lot of people rely on in America, especially the prices. But Taylor in 22 states that when costs for things like food, commodities, and bags go up, businesses will inevitably pass their increased costs on to the consumers, who are already fighting against rapidly increasing prices for food and other necessities. While $1 or $2 per bag may not mean much to some consumers, these costs can quickly add up for individuals and families on fixed incomes. The people have a harder financial burden with a ban, but also that also goes along with the businesses themselves. Graham in 21 tells us that, and yet, because it's political trendy at the moment, this miracle of modern science, which keeps so much smaller restaurants in business during the worst year ever, is now a target at Denver's politicians who want to make points back home telling restaurants around the state what kind of takeout containers we need to stock. As any business owner knows, it's not simple. Not only are the alternative containers they propose we use more expensive, and for an industry that is operating on margins on razor thin, that they are cutting to the bone, they are also becoming increasingly difficult to find and stock in sufficient amounts. The ban is only perpetuating the issue. If we ban, we're harming everyone in America. There's no reason for why we should be banning just because of the magnitude of the impacts we provide. Contention 3, marginalized groups. On paper, a ban may seem appealing, but one huge factor that people time and time again completely brush under the rug are low-income people and people with disabilities. Jenks and Obringer in 20 illustrates the most significant critique of the straw ban craze has come from the disabled community, which publicly decried straw bans as being ableist. Disabled people's inability to position certain straws, their risk as choking hazard, the inability to use them for hard liquids, and possible injury from the poking of one's mouth are just some problems disabled people face when presented with plastic straw alternatives. Other disabilities that will be affected are blind and deaf people. There are plastic inside of glasses and hearing aids, and by definition will be banned, and in turn the prices will be raised. We can't ban or we hurt all of America, and for all these reasons and nothing more, there should be con ballot.
You should stand up for me. Okay. And this is the first speaker cross-X. And since I spoke first, can I have the first question?
Yep.
We're going to start that time now. On your contention 1, saying that alternatives are bad, you're saying that we should team up with plastic companies, and that's how we solve for the app's harms. So then why haven't we in the status quo?
I can't really tell you why the government hasn't, just that we need to.
So you're saying that we need to. How can we prove that this could actually happen, though, in the status quo?
What do you mean?
How can you provide any sort of solvency for any of the app's harms through the status quo?
Well, we're not necessarily trying to do that, just we're saying that we need to be doing that. Now, can I take a question?
Go ahead.
So you talk a lot in your first contention, you have a few main impacts. Can you just restate exactly what those impacts are?
Right, so our first impact there is going to be human lives, and our second impact is going to be the economic impacts that are caused by the health effects by plastic production.
Mm-hmm. So how many people exactly are killed because of air pollution?
In the world, it's 1 million, but the United States causes 60,000 of those.
And how will banning single-use plastic actually?
Because you significantly mitigate plastic production and you prevent it and you make it so that we aren't producing as much, and so you won't see these impacts affecting people's health.
Okay, you can take your question.
Of course. Let's talk about your contention to small businesses. We've banned plastic in other places. So give me an empirical example of how much a small business has been affected before in a country that has banned plastics.
Yeah, so we don't exactly have empirical examples as of right now. All we tell you is that when we have banned for before, we have seen these prices of things go up.
Right.
We don't have an exact of where, but just that they have.
Right, but we see Canada has banned plastics and Rwanda has. So how much were those small businesses affected?
Yeah, so you can actually look at the evidence we provide, especially Graham in 21, where we tell you that these things that people are trying to make these people do, especially in the bans, of these food containers are way more expensive for the companies. On top of that, we also provide Taylor in 22, which says that these bags for these companies have been increased $1 to $2.
Right, okay, and then another quick follow-up on small businesses.
Yes.
Isn't plastic disposal already expensive in and of itself?
I don't have a number for that. Do you?
Yes, so it actually costs the United States in total $4 billion to dispose of plastics. Do your numbers outweigh that $4 billion caused by plastic disposal?
We actually don't provide you any of these numbers of plastic disposal like that. Can I actually take a quick question? So you talk about contention 2 of innovation. How exactly would innovation happen?
Yeah, so we tell you that forced innovation has happened empirically, and it's going to happen again when you have radical policy change like the AF ballot.
So how is this forced innovation?
Because you're banning and putting a blanket ban over single-use plastics, and so that forces innovations and forces us to be more creative and forces us to improve other sectors. Like in your marginalized groups contention about hearing aids. You say that hearing aids are made out of plastic. Shouldn't we try to, instead of just sticking with the comfortability and the normality of hearing aids being made out of plastic, and try to switch to more sustainable materials?
Can you restate your question?
Shouldn't we just try to switch to more sustainable materials rather than having people with disabilities have to rely on things like plastic, which are flimsy and not durable and not sustainable?
Yes, we actually read you inside of our first contention that these alternatives that you're trying to bring up do not actually work and have a horrible impact on the environment.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna take writing prep and I'll start that now. We'll end prep there, that was 110 used. And we are doing the first negative affirmative rebuttal. With that, is everyone ready? Okay, with that, let's begin. First, we're going to start off with an overview. There's one main issue with the con, and they tell you that there's going to be negative impacts if we ban single-use plastics, but we tell you in the last cross-X that there's no impact that's going to happen. And we can see that through their contention 1 of alternatives are bad. We have 3 main responses. First, we tell you that alternatives win time frame and magnitude. The United Nations in 23, plastic waste can take anywhere from 20 to 500 years to decompose. Our opponents are trying to paint the picture that alternatives are bad because they aren't simple as single use. But today you're choosing what's right, but not what's easy. It's easy to keep using plastic use, but time frame they lose because it significantly takes longer to decompose, and magnitude, you're hurting everyone. Extend our negative impacts that we read in the first constructive, telling you that people are empirically being hurt. Now second, paper is already better than plastic. Thompson in 17 furthers that in terms of disposal, paper bags are better than their plastic counterparts. Paper is compostable, not plastic. We tell you that these other economical harms are going to be outweighed. Now, third and lastly, banning single-use plastic will force companies to innovate and alternative use products. Cross-supplier contention too. Linwell and 20 backs this up, saying not only does banning single-use products reduce pollution, but it also reduces demand for plastic reduction that's contributing to global climate change. But beyond these impacts, the bans have cultural effects. Companies are forced to innovate, rethinking their designs and sourcing sustainable materials. Overall, this contention of alternatives are bad are not going to be outweighed because one, we can improve products for these people and improve the overall environment of the United States. Now let's move into contention 2 of small businesses. 2 main responses. First, we can delink this argument. Banning single-use plastics would actually be good for the economy. But second, plastic disposal is already costly. Pecky in 1918, plastic bags inevitably end up in landfills where they are either buried or burned in incinerators. Cities, towns, businesses pay about $80 a ton for them to go there. The plastic bag industry collects $4 billion per year in profits from the U.S. retailers. This is specifically going to be small businesses, and they're saving money in the long run. You're going to be helping the economy if you're voting for AF. Now, let's go to the contention 3 of marginalized groups. We have 2 main responses. First, we can turn this argument saying that banning single use helps marginalized groups. Second, plastics can be argumented to accommodate disabled people. Hewitt 23, environmental versus the needs of disabled people, creating equal ableism, compromise is the way forward, and already exists in our approach to single plastics. For example, plastic tops for the takeout drinks like coffee and pop are not banned because there are no reliable alternatives. The environmental costs of keeping those plastics have balanced with the need to carry drinks safely. These are companies available for plastic straws too. Judge, this argument is just telling you that right now there's no alternatives for these single-use plastics. If we ban them, then we can make alternatives specifically for marginalized groups. You're going to be outweighing the AF on this argument because we outweigh and help the people more. Now with that, let's lastly go over the pro side of the flow. We just tell you that if you vote for the AF, you're voting for a better environment and you're voting for a cleaner, safer pollution. We tell you right now that you is responsible for 15% of the United States pollution, and if we don't take action right now, this climate is always going to get worse. Right now, the status quo, which is the con, they are doing nothing to help these people. You're going to be voting for the AF because we make it safer for these people, and specifically with the impacts of single-use plastics. For these reasons, you're voting for affirmative.
Okay, we will start prep time now. We will stop that there with exactly a minute used. Okay. And for off-time roadmap, this is the first negative rebuttal, and we will be going first over the negative side of the case, and then we'll move over the pro. And with that, is everyone ready? And with that, we will start the time now. First, let's look to the overview that they tell us. They tell you that the con has no impact, but we tell you that when you ban single-use plastics, you hurt our world and our country as a whole by creating worse emissions. But let's move into our first contention. They tell you that they win on time frame and magnitude. They lose on both time frame and magnitude for the fact that they're creating more emissions and making it where more emissions
happen is winning on magnitude because it costs more lives. But let's look to the second attack. They tell you that paper is better than plastic, but we tell you that when you produce paper, you have more emissions, making it worse than plastic. But then let's look to the when they say force innovation. We'll go over that when we go over the case. But let's look for the D-link that they tell us in our second contention. We tell you that this D-link can't even be prioritized because they don't give you any evidence. But let's move to the second attack. They say disposable is costly, but we tell you that when you actually do this, that single-use plastics are what's helping the environment, and our economy, so we have to be prioritizing single-use over what they're saying. But then let's move to marginalized groups. They say turn, and they say it helps these marginalized groups, and then they tell you that it's going to accommodate to help people. But look at Jinx Snowbringer in 20, where we read you in case that these accommodations won't actually work. But let's move to my opponent's side of the case. First, on my opponent's first contentions, we have 5 attacks. First, the most common alternative paper results in more emissions than plastics. This is McGrath in 23, where it tells us that according to a certain study, manufacturing paper emits 80% more greenhouse gases and considers that making paper uses trees that instead could be absorbing carbon dioxide. The paper bag making process also results in 50 times more water pollution than making plastic bags. They don't actually uphold emissions. Well, let's look to the second attack. It's a turn. Reusable alternatives are worse when it comes to plastics, when it comes to emissions. That's Green in 22, where it tells us that more energy and manufacturing, distribution, utilization, and disposal means greater environmental impacts coming out of the soil. But third, many single-use plastics are reused multiple times, significantly reducing their lifetime carbon footprint, making them not as bad as my opponent tells us. This is Bags of Ban No Date, where it tells us that more than 90% say that they reuse plastic bags at least once for every time, from lining trash cans to packing lunches and picking up after pets. In fact, Recycle Quebec, a Canadian government agency, found that plastic bags have a 77.7% reuse rate as small trash can liners. But fourth, turn. Alternatives create higher emissions again. This is Volvus in 20, where it tells us that alternatives to plastics for a 500 milliliter bottle off other packages types, fiberglass, steel, and aluminum emit more greenhouse gases than plastic water bottles. But fifth, turn. You're not stopping emissions for the whole world, you're only stopping for the US. And then six, cross-player contention one, where we tell you that all alternatives are worse. They have no ground. But let's move to innovation. We have a few main responses. First, bans aren't counterintuitive to innovation that force through innovation. They talk about this innovation is the forced innovation they talk about it is not through a ban. This is Barca in 21, where it tells us after careful analysis of the legislation, we have conducted that it won't end plastic waste. We tell you that these innovations that they happen are actually through bans. But second, companies would find loopholes to avoid completely banning single-use plastics. This is Lydia in 23, where it tells us that people and businesses affected by a ban will often try to find exceptions or loopholes that will allow them to not to cooperate. But third, there is no impact. Companies are already innovating. A ban isn't necessary for innovation. But let's move on to microplastics first. We tell you that there is a fundamental problem with suggesting that microplastics cause risk. That's Lessel in 20, where it tells us that the best available evidence suggests that microplastics do not pose widespread risks. But second, they have no impact. Microplastics are too hard to scientists to even understand. That's Lim in 21, and that's why you're voting for negation. Thank you.
Okay. And since I spoke first, can I take the first question?
Yes, totally.
Okay. Let's go to your contingent 3 of marginalized groups. What are you guys doing right now to actually solve for this issue?
Not getting rid of reusable plastic that's actually helping these marginalized groups. May I have a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, you tell us that you're going to solve emissions and greenhouse gases. If alternatives are worse for both pollution and water, but also the greenhouse gases, how are you solving?
Okay, yeah, so we don't tell you that we solve for global emissions.
That's
or
your whole entire second impact.
Second impact on our contention 1?
Yeah.
No, we tell you that our 2 impacts is 1, human lives, and second, economics. We don't
Human
talk
lives
about
and
anything
greenhouse
about
emissions.
solving.
Okay, so then how do you uphold your impact?
Yeah, so we uphold our impacts because we stop single-use plastics that emit carbon, if you look at our Vision 21, we tell you that if we don't act now, then these global emissions will raise. What we're telling you right now is that we're putting a stop and actually acting on this.
Why use something that's going to make these global emissions raise even more?
Because it won't raise significantly more, and second, you never give us
I give you
second-
6 cards.
You gave us 6 cards, but quantity doesn't equal quality.
Okay, do you have a question?
Yeah, let's go to your contention. Contention 3 again, marginalized groups.
Yes.
Right now there is nothing to help, or there's no alternatives for these marginalized groups. How
What's
are you
your
guys
card?
going to solve?
What is your card that there's no alternatives?
That's going to be Hewitt in 23.
Yeah, and that's why we're not going to be banning plastics, because when we have no alternatives, we just hurt these marginalized groups and not actually have any.
Okay, and then I have a quick follow-up question.
Totally.
Okay, let's go to my contention 2 of innovation.
Yes.
So your second response is Lydia in 23 saying that businesses won't cooperate, correct?
Yes.
Then your third response was saying that companies right now are already innovating, so don't lose
No, because we tell you when a ban happens that people are going to actually find loopholes to do it, but then our third response is that there already is innovation happening in the common
Okay,
world.
so you just prove our impact that innovation will happen.
No, we
So
don't,
what's
because,
the negative impact of innovation?
because not all
happening?
companies are innovating. We just tell you that innovation still happens in the common world.
Okay,
May I have a
awesome.
question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, you tell us that we have to have our responsibility. If
Yeah.
other countries are still doing this, how do we uphold this?
Yeah, so right now, US is top 15% in the United States and second in the world. And if we don't take action right now, then
Where's your solvency in your whole entire first convention?
Yeah, our solvency is putting a stop to plastics. Right now, people are not taking responsibility, and when's the last time recycling has actually worked? It's time for government action to actually be implemented.
Do you have a question? Or may I take another one?
Let's go to your contention 1 of alternatives are bad.
Yes.
So you're basically talking about glass and you're talking about cotton, correct?
Glass, paper, cotton,
So how do these negative impacts outweigh on plastic?
We tell you that when you actually make these, when you take away plastics, you make it where you have more greenhouse gas emissions, which leads to more lives being lost. We also tell you that the water pollution increases, and you make it where you have to have more energy to produce these things, which also hurts the world as a whole. May I have a question?
That's cross.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
You're totally fine.
And I will take some running prep time starting now. And then that prep time there with about 1 minute used. And for a quick off-time roadmap, I'm going to first hit the con side of the flow, then I'll go ahead and touch on the pro side of the flow. With that, if everybody's ready, then I will begin. On the con side of the flow, let's talk about that overview there. They're telling you that the AF ballot hurts the world. We tell you that none of their impacts happen. We have seen bans being implemented in many countries, but in none of their contentions do they give you an empirical example where their arguments actually happened. Their contention 3 of marginalized groups. Where in the world have we seen that marginalized groups have actually been harmed more when bans were in place? Make them stand up in their next speech and read you an empirical example, because they can't. Their impacts are far-fetched. But now, more specifically, on their first contention of alternatives are bad, you're going to be condensing all of their arguments on alternative, and we're going to touch on that later in the speech. But we're going to, on alternatives are bad, you're going to be extending the fact that forced innovation will solve. You'll see that when people see harmful effects on the environment, you're going to be improving it. They drop the card that Cadence reads there that says that there's going to actually be a decrease in pollution. But on their contention to small businesses, they try to respond by saying that plastics will help the economy, but they give you no dollar amount. Whereas Cadence and I offer you $104 billion. Those are 2 cards. One is referred to in the constructive, and the second one is on the fact that plastic disposal is far more costly than alternatives for small businesses. But on their contention 3 of marginalized groups, they tell you this Jenks and O'Bringer and 20 card that says that accommodations don't work. But again, Judge, they don't do anything for marginalized groups in the con world. They don't actually care about this impact, because if they did, then they would advocate for it. The only team that provides you any sort of solvency and any shot at any sort of change to help marginalized groups is the con ballot, and that's through our second contention of forced innovation. But now onto the pro side of the flow. On our first contention of responsibility, they read you 5 key responses, but all of them are basically saying the exact same thing, which is that alternatives are worse. But we're going to condense this, and we're going to say, to this I have 2 key responses. First, they're worse in production, however, they're over the long run in time, when you base this round off of time frame and magnitude, you're going to be voting off of on the pro on this. Judge, paper, which is what they constantly keep on referring to, takes about 2 to 5 months to decompose, whereas when you compare it to plastic, which takes 450 years, the pro outweighs on time frame and magnitude. But second, they drop the alternatives we read you. That's Zhang and 22 that when Coulthard conceded in their last speech, Judge. We tell you, all the alternatives that they read to you in round aren't the same ones that we're advocating for. But now, on our contention 2 of innovation here, they tell you that it's not counterintuitive and we won't end plastic waste. But they don't solve either. We can't end global plastic waste, but we can take a step at ending national plastic waste. And that is critical because, as you see in our contention 1, 60,000 lives are lost every single year because of plastic waste. But on the second and third response, we're going to condense them, where they tell you that there's no impact to people when innovate. We tell you forced innovation has happened empirically, and that's why we are able to survive today is off of this forced innovation. But on their response to our microplastics, they say that scientists don't understand microplastics. But that's obviously not true, because we read you 2 key cards about microplastics, both of which when Coulthard conceded. That's Golden 23 and Zhang in 22, where they tell you directly, science shows you that microplastics causes damages cells and causes birth defects. That's what happens when you vote for the con world. You allow for these impacts to continue to happen, and that's why you must affirm, because we're your only shot at solvency. It's a try or die. Thank you.
We will be taking our time to start now.
Then this is the negative summary. And then if everyone's ready?
Yes.
If everyone's ready? Okay, I can begin my first word. To start off my speech, let's go over my first 3 contentions. The first being how plastic alternatives are bad. Me and Brigham tell you time and time again that by banning single-use plastic, we're not going to be doing anything for the status quo except for perpetuate the issue, especially where we tell you about these cotton bags, where in order to get the exact carbon emissions out, you have to use them 100 to 3,000 times in order to get what IF is advocating for. On top of that, with our second contention, we tell you about how small businesses will be detrimentally affected. We tell you empirically that prices have gone up and will continue to skyrocket if we have a ban in the US. On top of that, we have our contention 3 of marginalized groups. They tell you a few examples of how we're not necessarily saying we're not helping these marginalized groups, but look at the evidence we actually do provide. We're helping these marginalized groups by not taking away the things that directly help them. You could look to our evidence where we tell you that disabled people cannot be using these straws because of the choking hazards, they can't use them for hot liquids, and so many more. But now let's go on to their side of the flow, especially their first contention, where they tell you about all these things about pollution. But what you're going to be doing is you're going to be You're going to be extending all of the cards that Brigham reads you in case. For example, green, volnus, and especially stuff that we use in our case, we're only perpetuating the issue and making it so much worse. What's going to be happening is that these things that we're bringing up are even worse for the environment. On top of that, they tell you how the human life impact is not upheld. Brigham told us in the cross-sects because it's simply true. The human life impact that they're trying to preach about, it's not upheld by their own case because the cards that we bring up, these carbon emissions that they're trying to bring up with their first impact will be detrimentally affected because the carbon emissions will be worse. These 600,000 people that will be dying, are currently dying in status quo, will be skyrocketed even more from that if we switch to alternatives. On top of that, they have no solvency in their entire first contention. Now, they even state that in their first cross-sects there is no solvency. Now let's go on to their second contention of forced innovation. First of all, one response that me and Brigham are providing is that's not necessarily forced innovation. You could look to Lydia and Leslie where we tell you that currently they are innovating, but if we have a forced ban, then these companies will not be innovating. They'll find loopholes to get out of it because it's forced. Now let's go on to a few other things, especially that have been talked about in our case. Let's just extend and boil everything down into three main arguments, and that's going to be based off of innovation, our first contention of the pollution, and then finally the third main thing that we're going to be talking about today's round is going to be about these marginalized groups and how they're being affected, especially by the small businesses. What we're going to be seeing is an increase in prices, especially when people in America are already at an all-time low and can't afford basic necessities. Now, for all of these reasons, there should be nothing besides a negative ballot in today's round. Thank you.
Are we all ready for our clearing cross?
And since we spoke first, can we have the first question?
Yes.
Perfect. Then I will begin. On your first contention, you keep on bringing up this idea that carbon emissions are worse by plastic. How much worse is it?
Well, when we look to, we have many sources, but let's look to like paper. When we actually do this, paper emits 80% more greenhouse gases. That's
How
why
many
paper,
people do greenhouse gases kill per year?
Isn't that your guys' whole entire first is?
No, we're talking about plastic pollution. That's how many people plastic pollution kills. How many people does greenhouse gases kill?
I
We don't have that number. If you would like to provide one, that'd be great.
Sorry, if we would like. Sorry.
If you guys would like to provide one,
Can we have a question?
Go ahead.
Okay, you guys say that you're going to be solving for like pollution. How are you solving?
So first of all, we're not standing up here and gonna advocate for solving for pollution, but we tell you that we need to take responsibility for the 15% that we contribute to, and you can only do that through the AF ballot because we're killing thousands of lives domestically and internationally.
If Asia countries are actually the people who are contributing the most, then why are we actually solving this?
Can you explain that
Because
question?
we're second in the countries. China is first. And although we're not the first,
Okay,
that
but
doesn't
the
mean
other
we
9
shouldn't take
people are still
responsibility.
behind us. The top 9 people in pollution is Asia countries. So how are we solving this if we're not actually
Okay,
taking
yeah, but we're second.
Okay,
China is 30%. Second is United States, which is 15%. India is third with 7%.
and that's literally another, so you only stop 15% out of the 100.
Okay,
Don't you
but
think it's important to stop some than just let it continue to happen?
I would say we should probably doing something that's going to stop all.
okay, yeah. What are
doing
you guys
how do
doing
you
to
stop all
solve
of
for
it?
the 1 billion deaths that
Well,
happen
we're
each
saying
year?
that what you guys are doing is actually hurting these people because you're causing more emissions that's going.
Can we take a quick question?
Totally.
Yes.
On your contention to small businesses, you talk about how prices will skyrocket.
Mhm.
By how much?
we tell you, especially in Graham and 21, they've gone up $1 to $2, which is detrimental in families of low income.
In total, how much will that affect though? Like when you put the
What do
number and you scale it to the rest of the country, how much is it?
We
affect
don't have
us?
that exact number.
Okay, can I take one more question?
Yes.
On your contention 3, you talk about how disabled people can't use alternative straws because it pokes them and it's harmful for them. Doesn't that mean that all disabled people can't use any straws, whether it's plastic or paper?
No, what we're trying to say with this entire contention is in 2020, there was a craze to ban plastic straws, but they were against this because they deemed it as ableist. You can look at their actual voices. They said we should not be banning plastic straws.
How many disabled
because-
people actually back this movement that alternative
We don't have
straws
that
are?
exact number. Maybe we have a question.
Okay, yeah, but how many do like actually support this? When
Yeah,
you read
we
your
don't have
card,
that
like
number.
how many people did it survey? How many people did it interview?
We can look and give that to you after cross if you want it.
Okay,
Okay,
and you
let's
guys
look
have a
at
question.
innovation. You tell us that when forced innovation happens, it actually works. But is this forced innovation you talk about through a ban, or is it just forced innovation through like competition?
So we tell you that this forced innovation happens under incredible circumstances. We read that to you in
Is
case.
it real
And
ban?
incredible circumstances is the ban, because that is a radical policy change which we haven't seen before in the United States at this scale. So we tell you, yes, it is incredible circumstances, and yes, it does link to forced innovation. Yeah, we'll take ready.
Alright, this is the last speech, which is the voter speech, and for an off-time wrap-up, I'm going to have 3 voters. With that, is everyone ready? Okay, let's go into our first voter, which is going to be empirics. Judge, overall this whole round, we tried to tell you that they couldn't give us one single empiric. We've asked them time and time again to give us a single example of where these impacts have happened. But specifically, let's look at small businesses. We told you that small businesses won't be affected, and we gave you 3 responses. We tell you that costs for small businesses will decrease once we ban single-use plastics. Remember, this one number was $600,000 per year. They dropped this argument, and they dropped the empirical example of other countries that have these small businesses being affected. They don't give us numbers, and they don't give us empirics. Overall, you're going to be voting on that one main issue because they couldn't prove that at all. Now with that, let's go into our second voter, which is going to be solvency. Judge, overall this whole round, they're trying to paint the picture that we have no solvency, but that's not what we're telling you. We're telling you right now that United States is responsible for 15% of pollution in the world. Right now, the United States needs to take stands, and the status quo is doing nothing to do that. And only to do that, you need to vote affirmative. And lastly, let's talk about the third and last voter, which is going to be most important, which is going to be alternatives. In their next speech, they're going to try to paint the picture that alternatives like glass and cotton is more overwhelming and emits greenhouse gases. But that's not what we're trying to tell you. They tell you that pollution is worse, but Judge, we tell you that plastic takes 450 years to decompose. And we tell you that they dropped our Zhang in 22 card, telling you that it's worse. We tell you that plastics takes longer to decompose in the environment. Right now, plastics isn't doing anything, and the con isn't doing anything to solve that other than saying that alternatives are bad. But again, remember our argument of innovation. We tell you that once we ban plastics, companies are going to be forced to innovate. This will make products better and products last. Overall, if you're voting for pro, you're voting for a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Okay, we will start there from now. Okay, we will have that.
For an off-time roadmap, I'll just be going over 3 voters and why the con ballot has won this debate. And with that, is everyone ready? Okay, we can start that time now. let's look to the first voter of lives. That is the biggest impact in today's round, and that's why you're voting for the con. We tell you that 8 million people die every year to greenhouse gas emissions. That's why you're not going to be preferring the pro ballot, and that's why you're going to be preferring the con ballot, because we're not increasing greenhouse gas emissions like the pro ballot will do. We win on magnitude, we win on probability, and we win on time frame. But let's look to alternatives. We tell you that any alternatives that we move to, such as paper, cloth, metal, and glass, are also worse for the environment, but also worse for greenhouse gas emissions. We tell you that when you do this, you make it where our whole entire world is going to be in a worse scenario than it already is. They tell you that they're going to be stopping and saving lives, but they don't tell you how, and that's why you're voting for the con. But let's look to my opponent's first contention of responsibility. They tell you that they're going to be stopping 15%. But what about the other 85% that they sweep